get all preserved and standing there for people to see for many years. Should make really a pretty house when they get it restored again. Get that old plaster off of it, repoint the rock walls.
How's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic.
Hey, Nat. Hey, Britton.
Can you all hear me? Michael.
Hey, Michael. We can hear you.
Okay. I just walked in the door, so I'm just making sure I'm connected.
Okay. Thanks.
Nat, how you been?
I've been well, sir.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. You keeping you busy these days?
Nat, it looked like you were talking, but we can't hear you.
A lot of Scandinavian names popping up.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, good.
There may be an echo.
Yeah. Do you have somebody in there with you?
Echoing you?
We have a special celebrity tonight. So I apologize. Everything correct here. How's my sound now?
Much better.
All right.
Are you echoing from the room, Nat? Is that what you?
That lady there.
We have two computers side by side. Mr. Johnson's joining us tonight, and so I'm going to make sure that he has volume and can talk because he has some things he'd like to share with you about his property. And I'm just going to be here making sure that you guys get what you need and that he has an opportunity to share with you.
Okay. Thank you, Nat. Myrna or Nat or Sophia, it does not look like we have a quorum right now of commissioners. Is that the case?
I believe we do now. Carolee just signed on also.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so do we know who we're missing this evening? Is anyone called in, Myrna, or?
Yes, Robert will not be participating, and I don't see Pam on here either. Catherine is on vacation, I believe. And yep, and we have Terry, yourself, Carol Lee and Faustine and Mr. Johnston.
Okay, thank you.
And hello, can you all hear me? This is Brad Walters.
Yes, Brad, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it looks like we do have a quorum for this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. Good evening. The time is 6:02 p.m. I'm Amanda Parr. I am the chair of the Historic and Architectural Review Commission, and I would like to welcome everyone to our meeting of the City of Georgetown Historic and Architectural Review Commission. The Historic and Architectural Review Commission, appointed by the mayor and city council, is responsible for hearing and taking final action on applications for certificates of appropriateness based upon the city council adopted downtown and old town design guidelines and the Unified Development Code. This virtual meeting format is different from the regular meetings at City Hall, but we will still follow a similar meeting format. We will consider the cases scheduled for this meeting individually as follows. Staff will make a presentation of the case, and then I will give the commissioners an opportunity to ask questions to staff. After the staff presentation, the applicant or their representative will have up to 10 minutes to present or provide comments on their project if they choose, followed by questions from the commissioners. Once staff and the applicant have addressed questions from the commissioners, we will open the meeting for the public hearing. If you would like to provide comments on the agenda item, please wait until I open the public hearing. When I open the public hearing, I will ask if anyone would like to speak. And if you would, please unmute yourself and state your name. Once we have the name of everyone who would like to speak, I will call the names in order, and when your name is called, you will have up to 3 minutes. A speaker may allot their time to another speaker for a maximum of 6 minutes. If you wish to allot your time to another speaker, please indicate so when I open the public hearing. Please remember that all comments and questions must be addressed to the commission, and please be patient while we organize the speakers during the public hearing portion. You also have the opportunity to provide comments through the Q&A section of the meeting located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please provide your full name, address, and your comment will be read by staff. After everyone who has asked to speak has spoken, I will close the public hearing and provide a few minutes of rebuttal time to the applicant if they so choose. Following this set of questions, I will ask the commissioners for a motion and a second, followed by deliberation and any additional questions to staff or the applicant, and then I will call for a vote on the motion. If the applicant or a member of the public has questions or concerns following a vote on an agenda item, please communicate those to the recording secretary outside of this meeting so that staff can follow up with you. You can provide your contact information through the Q&A section and request follow-up. You can call the planning department at 512-930-3575, or you can email historic@georgetown.org. I would like to remind everyone to please state your name before you make any comments. That includes staff, commissioners, applicants, and members of the public who speak during the public comment portion of the meeting. If you're a member of the public, please also provide your address. The first agenda item is, okay, we've got item D, which is consideration and possible action to approve the minutes from the February 11th, 2021 regular meeting of the Historic and Architectural Review Commission. Do I have any edits or amendments to the minutes? Okay, not seeing any edits or amendments, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, this is Steve. I move for approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnston. Do I have a second?
Faustine Curry, second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Johnston, a second by Commissioner Curry. That motion is approved. Moving on to our second agenda item. Okay, this is item E, which is consideration and possible action to approve the minutes from the February 25th, 2021 regular meeting of the Historic and Architectural Review Commission. Do I have any edits or amendments to the minutes? Okay, not seeing anyone, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve that. This is Terry Hyde.
Thank you, Commissioner Hyde. I have a motion to approve as written. Do I have a second?
Second, Faustine Curry.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. Okay, so that is approved as well. Okay, just one quick point of order. I'm going to take roll this evening. So do I have, so Commissioner Johnston?
Yes, ma'am.
You're here, right?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Good. Commissioner Hyde,
I'm here.
Commissioner Nunn,
Here.
and Commissioner Curry.
Yes.
And then I see we have an alternate, Pam Mitchell, on the phone. Pam, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, moving on to our next agenda item. Okay, we have item F, which is a public hearing and possible action on a request for a historic landmark designation for the site and building located on approximately 0.1899 acres situated in the Barney C. Lowe Survey, abstract number 385, for the property generally located at 1208 Westinghouse Road. Britton.
Good evening, everyone. Britton Bostick, the Downtown and Historic Planner. Just to check, can everybody see my full screen on the item under consideration? Thank you so much. So I am so excited. I don't mind sharing because tonight we have a historic landmark designation to consider. And this is the first historic landmark designation that Harc will have been considering. So kind of a historic moment for us and our community this evening. And I'm so excited to get to share this beautiful property with y'all. So this is a property that is on Westinghouse Road. If you're very familiar with the area around Mays Street, this is kind of just to the east of the DPS office and kind of across Westinghouse Road and kitty corner to Terra Vista, the subdivision residential development. And so here we see on the aerial map what is the homestead of the Johnson family and has been continuously since the 1860s. So this is a property that is one of the oldest remaining historic structures in our city, and it did not used to be in the city. This used to be in the public records. It mentions that it's 3 or 4 miles south of Georgetown, and so you can imagine how much our city has grown over time. This was previously in an area that would have been considered more as Palm Valley, an area of primarily Swedish settlement and agricultural land during the 1860s, kind of mid to late 1800s, and then into the 1900s. And so this is where the Johnson family established their homestead in Williamson County, and then it's been in the same family since that time. So right now, today, this is in an area that is zoned, the future land use designation calls for this to be a regional center. And what that means, commissioners, and what y'all don't see very often because we're normally looking at certificates of appropriateness, but the future land use map is part of some kind of look ahead policy for the city of Georgetown, if you will. When we look at how the city grows over time, we look at how properties develop over time. The future land use map helps to provide guidance to us. And so what this property, I think is important to share, what this property is intentioned to be in the future is a development that would potentially have a mix of commercial and multifamily uses on it. And so that future land use map kind of gives us the guidance for what goes in an area. And you can see this is kind of on the edge of an area we call regional center. Regional centers tend to be commercial areas primarily that we've identified near major intersections and the intersections of major roadways. So along kind of higher volume capacity streets and roads. But you can see very close by is an area that's designated as mixed density neighborhood. And so that's housing of different types. It can also mean some neighborhood serving commercial, kind of a smaller scale. So you see this kind of historically agricultural property is kind of right in the middle of a lot of new development that's come along recently on Westinghouse Road. And so if we look at the zoning right now, just kind of the main portion of this property is currently in the city limits and is currently zoned. So this landmark application is partnered with another application that's been submitted. It will be heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission next week in their meeting on March 16th, but the applicant is requesting annexation of the full property and then a rezoning on annexation. So right now what's in the city includes this house. That's why you see a green square. It's zoned agriculture. And then the white area around it is because that portion is not currently in the city. Where you see the colors on the map is the portion that is within the city limits. So right now it's ag, the use is ag, even the part that's not within the city limits, but we don't zone outside of the city limits. And so you can see we've got business park, we've also got multifamily, high density across the street, commercial, kind of general commercial, and then local commercial as well. So this is an area that's primarily commercial. The reason that that's important is not necessarily specific to this application, but just to give the commissioners that context, because this is a historic landmark designation is a zoning request. And so as much as we are looking at the history of the property, we're also considering the zoning context of the property today, and then what's being proposed with the concurrent applications. So now to get into the fun part that we all enjoy. So this is a property that is on the National Register of Historic Places. And as such, it would be eligible for historic preservation tax credits as long as it's used as an income producing property. So that could either be rental property, or it could also be a commercial property used as an office or some other similar use. And so what the historic tax credits offer is for the rehabilitation of historic properties. There's kind of a partnering of a tax incentive that's available at both the state and the federal level. Those operate in different ways. And so you're not required to use those tax credits, but being on the National Register of Historic Places makes you eligible. It's a big part of the eligibility for that. And so this is a photo of the J.J. and Hedda Johnson farm. We don't know the date of this photo, but you can see kind of the road that became Westinghouse Road. So this is kind of the farm homestead. You can see some barns and other structures in the photo as well. And then you can kind of see where they grew their crops, which I understand to have been corn and cotton. And Mr. Johnson can help us out with that after my presentation concludes. This is a two-story limestone structure. And so you can see a large white two-story house in the photo, but what isn't visible in the photo is the detail, which is that this was constructed of locally quarried limestone. And then later on, a stucco coat was put on it that's on the house today. But this is the only example that I'm aware of a limestone I house in the city of Georgetown or its surroundings. And so an I house was a house style that was very popular in the 1860s. We actually have as late an example as a 1911 or 1912 I house style. And so what that means is that the first floor usually had an entrance or a front door right in the middle, and then it was symmetrical on the interior. So you would have had a big room to the right and a big room to the left with a center hallway and stair. And then upstairs was often actually symmetrical as well. Once you got to the top of the stairs in that hallway, you would have had a big room to the right and a big room to the left. When the houses were built at this period of time, which is the late 1860s, you had a much different room configuration than you do in houses today. So you might have had fewer rooms, but larger rooms. You would not have had indoor plumbing at the time. Kitchens may or may not have been attached depending on what the kind of perceived risk of fire was. And so we can see this house, and then we can a little bit on the left see the one-story addition to the rear. We're not exactly sure what date that was added on, but it's been part of the house for a very long time. So this is one of those early views of the house. And then it's also got some, what appears to be some wood columns and porch railing details. And so it's a really large house for the period of time that it was built. If you imagine Georgetown back only about 2 decades after Texas entered the United States. This is when this house looks like it was constructed. So we know that the Johnson family came over from Sweden in the 1850s. And then they, I believe, were farming in Williamson County that early, but this is the farm that they purchased in 1866. And so it seems like they probably had a smaller structure at first to get started, and then were able to build this house very quickly. The Johnson family were very, very successful farmers. And so at one point in time, it looks like they owned at least 3 different farms that encompassed several hundred acres of property. And so we can see another photo of the house before the stucco coat was applied. You can see the 6/6 windows, you can see the stone chimney, and then you can see that beautiful wood detailing on the porch. And so really a wonderful structure. This would have been kind of the southwest view of the house. And so it was really amazing to me to see kind of the full limestone construction. This would have been something that was kind of challenging to acquire the stone, haul the stone in wagons, and then construct this by hand. And you can kind of see the quality of the craftsmanship there in the photo. And so the photo is of JJ and his wife Hedda Johnson. And so the Johnsons were prominent members of the Swedish immigrant community, especially in Palm Valley, an area between what we know as Georgetown and Round Rock today. And they were also kind of prominent members in the Swedish Lutheran Evangelical Church. So here are some additional photos provided by the owner, the current Mr. Johnson. And so we are not sure who the gentlemen are in this photo, but this is kind of the back side of the house with the one-story addition that was also stone and then had a little porch with some beautiful wood detailing there, a little bit of railing, and then also some brackets kind of under that beam to support the roof. And so you can see in the photo on the right, a little bit different view. You can see that kind of stovepipe coming up through the roof with the chimney. And that would, I believe that was an area that became the kitchen kind of later on. So as I said, this is on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1984, we had a historic resource survey of the city of Georgetown, and this house was identified on that survey, which is really wonderful because it was captured in photos in 1984. The black and white really kind of helps show the shape of the house. Very simple, but also really well constructed. And so by this time we have the stucco coating on it, so you're not able to see the detail of the stonework, but we can still see the stone lintels, which are kind of the pieces over the windows to hold the stone up above it, and then the sills are also that limestone. And so at some point in time in the Johnson family's experience, they no longer use the house directly. There is another residence on the property, but this house has been vacant for the past few years. And so here are some additional photos from that 1984 Historic Resource Survey. Unfortunately, the photos that we have in our collection are a little bit blurry, and so the detail is not really clear, but you can see the porch railings, and you can see that other than that little additional kind of utility area to the rear, the house really hasn't changed a whole lot over the years, other than that addition of the stucco. And it does need some repair and rehabilitation work as well at this point. And so here are some photos today. That limestone is still covered by the stucco, but still keeps its shape. It does need some repairs, some repair or replacement of the windows. A lot of the shutters are still there, and then the porch railings at this point are no longer on the structure. And so then you can see the very final addition there to the rear was a wood addition rather than the stone. And there's a lot of trees that have grown up around the property, but thankfully in the winter time, it's a little bit easier to see through those. So these are some photos of the Johnson family. So JJ and Hedda Johnson had a daughter who died at a young age. Their nephew, FG Johnson, kind of came to live with them, he and his wife. And FG and Matilda Johnson had 3 children, Hannah, Carl, and Oscar. And so we can see the FG Johnson family here. FG and Matilda Johnson bought the property from his uncle and aunt with the agreement that the families would still live together kind of as long as the senior Johnsons wanted to inhabit their house. And so kind of everybody lived there on the farm, and then the children all ultimately married. And so the current Mr. Johnson is the son of Carl and Minnie Johnson, and then we can see photos here. He did have a very good relationship with his aunt, Hannah Lawson. So that was Hannah Johnson, who had married Ben Lawson, and Mr. Johnson has a lot of wonderful memories of time with his aunt. She was the owner of this property for quite some time before it was inherited by Mr. Johnson. And there we can see Mr. Johnson as a very young man in the photos on the right. And so, commissioners, y'all are familiar with the approval criteria for certificates of appropriateness, but it's a little bit different for the designation of a historic landmark. So I'm going to go through the approval criteria there. I think it's important to note that this also acts a little bit differently in that according to our Unified Development Code, the City Council only needs to make a finding that the application complies with one of the 5 criteria. So there's not an expectation that the application or the property meet all 5, just at least one. And so here we see that it meets with 3 of the 5 criteria, which is more than the minimum expectation. So we look to see whether the property has character, interest, or value of the building, structure, or site because of its unique role in the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, county, state, or nation. And staff found that that did comply, particularly as this is one of the last remaining examples of a Swedish homestead farmhouse. And also because, as I said, it is the limestone house, which this is the only example that I know we had. All the other houses in Georgetown, to my knowledge, were constructed of wood. We're not aware of any particular notable event or occurrence at this site. So no signing of the Declaration of Independence here, for example. So in that regard, we marked it as does not comply because we didn't have any evidence that an event had occurred. Identification of the building, structure, or site with a person or persons who contributed notably to the culture and development of the city, county, state, nation, or society. We did find that it complied with that because this is a legacy property, Commissioner. So this property has been in the same family since 1868. It's in fourth generation ownership. And so what you may not be familiar with is the role that Swedish settlers played in Williamson County's growth and development in terms of its agricultural production. And so this is the farmhouse that serves as a remaining example of that period in our history. And also the Johnson family owned a substantial amount of property. One of the properties that they owned you may be familiar with is Mrs. Johnson once owned the house where the Keller Williams building in the downtown is now. So that house was demolished to make way for the Piggly Wiggly, which is what became HEB in Georgetown. But before that Piggly Wiggly came in, which is now the Keller Williams building, it's a beautiful limestone ashlar building at the corner of 10th and Austin. That was a one-story house that Hedda Johnson had owned in town. So not completely sure. It was a surprise to Mr. Johnson that she had owned that house. And so we're not sure if that was a house she used as a rental property or just as her house in town. The Johnsons were very, very successful. And so that may have very well been her house in town and not one that she stayed at full time. The Johnsons also, we know F.G. Johnson had bought the property that became St. Helens Catholic Church on Highway 29 east of Georgetown. So at one point in time, that was a farm that was over 100 acres that was farmed by the Johnson family. In our next, our fourth criteria, we found that it complied because the house does have distinctive elements of architectural design, detail material, or craftsmanship that make it an established or familiar visual feature or the related distinctiveness of a craftsman, master builder, architect, style, or innovation, including but not limited to all those things. And so I mentioned this is a very unique and rare example of a limestone house. I am happy to share with you that the interior walls are also limestone. So I don't have a photo of that to share with you, but this house is solidly limestone, which is something that I had never seen before. And I do believe that this is somewhat rare, not only for our area, but also for the state of Texas. And so the quality of craftsmanship that this Swedish family brought to the structure is something that helps it to endure today. And we anticipate it being able to be successfully rehabilitated for a new use in the future as the property is also looked at to develop. And so the last criteria is whether there is architectural value in the sense that the building, structure, site can be expected to yield information about history or prehistory. And we don't expect there to be any archaeological excavation that would assist us with that. So that was why it was marked does not comply, just because there's not an expectation that that's the way that this property would play a role. And so according to our notification requirements for rezonings, we notified 19 property owners within the notification buffer. We did place a notice in the Williamson County Sun on February 21st, and signs were posted on the property. To date, staff has received one comment in favor and no comments in opposition. And so in summary, this is a public hearing and possible action on a request for historic landmark designation for the site and building generally located at 1208 Westinghouse Road. And you're not used to this, Commissioner, so I wanted to highlight here. This is something that y'all will not be making a final determination on, but it is something in which you will be making a recommendation of approval or disapproval or approval with conditions to the City Council. And so in accordance with our Unified Development Code, y'all are holding a public hearing on this item and then voting to make a recommendation to the Council. And so that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. And I would also like to share The property owner, Mr. Charlie Johnson, is here with us in the planning department this evening, and we've set him up to be able to give comments to the commissioners. And the applicant, the property developer, Brad Walters, is also with us in the meeting and would like to make some comments as well, I believe.
Thank you, Britton. Okay, so I understand that we have Mr. Johnson here and the developer. Would you all like to make some comments this evening to the commission?
Charlie, please go ahead.
Is there, if there's anything you'd like to share on, you were sharing stories about the property and when that your aunt and uncle were there and that you spent some time there as a kid and how that got built. Is there anything you want to share with anyone?
Right now,
Yes, sir.
well,
You can take your mask off if you'd like, if it's easier.
I'm Charlie Johnson. I'm the last in the line of 4 generations. I've spent an awful lot of time as a little boy playing in this house, both wintertime and summertime. I used to love to sleep on the old upstairs porch, and the breeze was so pretty and you could see all around the country. And the same way at Christmas time, we always had our usual Swedish dinner called lutefisk, and have pickles and potatoes with it. Then after that, we'd eat what normal people eat. You know, the old Swedes always like to have that fish for Christmas. So I can remember many times when the farmers got together and baled hay and thrashed hay and a little bit of everything. Used that old dining room. Had a big monster dining room table that had a bunch of leaves in it. Bunch of old hardworking men sitting around and having dinner. So I can remember so many stories of that house, growing up in that house. And I spent a lot of time. So I'd get in trouble at home, so I'd run down to my uncle and aunt because they'd take up for me. So I had a lot of close, wonderful days of fun in that house. I remember a little kid, I used to go down that banister from upstairs, head first. Slide down that banister, you know, smart little kid. So I'm very much in favor of seeing this house remain there as a status symbol for other people to see how the old Swedes worked and came to this country and didn't know the country. They didn't know how to talk the language, but they still managed to build a home like that with not very much tools. I guess they bought them old rocks up that were so huge to make a 2-story building. I just marvel at what they were able to do. And it is my wish that it will remain standing there for many people to enjoy. Because I feel that there's a lot of interesting things to learn about the old house. And I know a lot about the old house. And remember when we used to separate the milk and the cream and all those hard things of work to do around there. Milked a lot of cows. So, but my uncle and aunt probably spent as much time in that house as any of the family did. And I spent a lot of time with them. So I'm looking forward to seeing it come back to its grand glory again for more people to enjoy it. And I would love to see it myself personally. So that's the main thing that I would like to talk about, is the fact that I want people to enjoy that house as much as I've enjoyed it over the years. Even though they're not family, a lot of things has happened there around that house over the years. So a lot of stories. Want to see it remain for everyone to enjoy. Thank you very much for getting to say a few words in my behalf for the house. Of course, I guess I'm prejudiced because I've spent so much time in it. And so hope that this will continue to be there on that hill and as a status symbol of some old Swedes that came all the way across the ocean and settled right here in Williamson County. It wasn't hard, it wasn't easy for them to overcome the language barrier. I can tell you jokes about when I was a little kid. I had to wait till I was 7 to start school because I couldn't talk English. My parents talked Swedish, so that's what I learned to talk. So I appreciate getting to say a few words in my behalf for the old Rock House. Have a lot of pleasant memories. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We are, you're obviously very proud of your homestead, as you should be, and we appreciate you being here tonight to say a few words about your property. So thank you very much. Nat, I think we also have the developer here, Mr. Walters.
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
We can, if you'd like to say a few words about the property.
Okay. Well, gosh, thank you so much, commissioners, for your work, and Britton, thank you for the great presentation just on this property, and Charlie for your words and stories. Charlie and I have been working on this together for almost a year now, and so this is really an exciting evening for me, and just a wonderful project to be involved in. And so, I don't know what more I could add other than just to assure you that my heart is in this 100%. And we have been, Charlie and I have been sort of meeting occasionally and talking about some of these stories, and have recorded some of those conversations just to try to keep an oral history that will hopefully go with the house. And some of the photos that you've seen, kind of my idea is that those will also be kind of enlarged, and we've gotten them, as you can see, scanned into the computer now. Those are sort of personal photos from Charlie's collection that we would get, put onto a larger format in the home, whatever its future kind of commercial use is, and after we can get it restored. So it's a really fun project, and this is just a first step for us. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions right now for either Britton or the applicant before I open the public hearing?
Amanda, I do. This is Caroline.
Go ahead.
I guess there has not been a decision made or determination made about what this building will be used for, but there is a developer the developer owns it, but no decisions have been made about what it will be used for. Is that right?
Mr. Walters, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Mr. Johnson owns the property, and he and I have an agreement for us to purchase the property, and then we would not actually begin the work until it works for Charlie. So that's part of our agreement, is that Charlie lives on the property, not in the home, but right next door, and so this is his homestead, and will remain that until there's a time when he's ready for us to sort of actually have the new use begin. We do hope to begin the restoration process as soon as we can. So I'm hoping that could, and it's in some ways it has started. We've begun the cleanup and are kind of working on that, but we haven't gone full speed ahead yet, but hopefully could begin later this year. And as far as the future use, that will be, I think everyone plans on that being a commercial use, not a residential use, which is part of the rezoning effort and the annexation that Britton referenced, which is kind of the larger project that is going before the Planning Commission Planning and Zoning next week. And to zone the larger parcel residential in the back, and then commercial along Westinghouse Road. And so we have a PUD zoning request or application that will be going in, and the frontage along Westinghouse would all be commercial uses. And so this house would fit into that.
Okay, and I have a question for Britton. Is this a local designation, state designation, or national? And I'm sorry if you said that, but I missed it.
No, not at all. This is brand new for us. So this is a local designation. And so essentially what this would do is create a mini historic district just for this property. So what we're really familiar with is the downtown and the old town historic zoning overlay districts. Within those historic districts, properties are protected, and we apply our design guidelines through the certificate of appropriateness process. So anytime a property proposes exterior modifications, we look to see what the certificate of appropriateness application process is for those changes, and then look at how to apply the design guidelines. This is a high priority structure, but it's located outside of any kind of historic zoning district. So right now, the only protection this property has is Harc approval is required for a demolition of the property. Harc approval and the certificate of appropriateness process are not required for any kind of modifications to this property. So what this would essentially do is treat the property like it's in a historic district where we normally see certificate of appropriateness applications, so that any future changes to this property would require, because it would be a landmark, most changes would require Harc approval and would even go to staff. And so this kind of sets it up for local zoning protections. It is on the National Register, but that doesn't provide any protections. It provides a recognition, and it also provides access to tax credits. It's not currently working through the state designation process. To be a recorded Texas historic landmark does have an application process, but it comes with some protections from the state. The strongest protections that we can give this house is the historic landmark designation. And so that is why after meeting with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Walters for the past several months, Mr. Johnson decided that this was the request that he wanted to move forward with in his interest of protecting the property in perpetuity.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Carolee. Any other comments or questions from commissioners before I open the public hearing?
Mr. Johnston, this is Mr. Johnson. This is Commissioner Johnston. You said you used to get in trouble when you were living there. What kind of trouble did you get into?
Who is that guy?
He's on the commission. He wants to know what kind of trouble you would get in when you were a kid.
Well, I'd get in a lot of trouble sliding down the banister. You
Thank
know,
you very much.
thing I probably should have mentioned about the mantle that's in the front bedroom or the front living room. That came out of a wealthy place in New York City where they got that mantle for the fireplace in the north bedroom.
Oh, wow. They brought it all the way down to Texas from New York City?
Yeah, brought it from New York City down and put it in that house.
And
That
it's
mantle,
still there.
It's got glass inlay in it, you know. It's still in the house, it's still in there.
Wow.
Sure is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Okay, any other questions or comments from the commission? Okay, being that this is a public hearing, I'm going to open the public hearing. Nat or Myrna, do we have anyone signed up to speak on this item?
I don't see anyone signed up, and no one's contacted me for that either.
Okay, thank you. Not having anyone signed up to speak, we will close the public hearing. Okay, commissioners, any final questions or comments for either the applicant or for staff before we make this recommendation? And Britton, I just want to be clear, we are just making a recommendation to approve, disapprove, or approve with conditions, a recommendation to City Council on this landmark designation. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And so normally when y'all vote, I give you your 4 options to approve, disapprove, approve with conditions, or postpone. In this case, it would be a motion to recommend approval, a motion to recommend disapproval, or a motion to recommend approval with conditions. And as usual, with any conditions, staff would just ask that you be specific about any conditions you might have in the motion so that we can capture those.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that for everyone on the commission, since this is a new way of doing this. So I would like to make a comment as the chair that I think that this is a worthy cause. And I like the idea of this property being protected in this way, so that we can continue to see it flourish here in Georgetown. So that would be my comment. But I will entertain a motion from the floor.
This is Carol Lee. I move that we designate this property as a historic landmark.
Thank you, Carolee. We have a motion to approve and a second by Commissioner Hyde.
Yeah, this is Terry. I second.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to approve the landmark designation, that recommendation to City Council, and a second by Commissioner Hyde. Let's take a vote. Commissioner Parr, approve. Commissioner Hyde,
Approve.
Commissioner Johnston,
Approve.
Commissioner Nunn,
Approve.
and Commissioner Curry.
Approved.
Okay, thank you very much. That motion carries. We will move on to our second item. Okay, so we are at item G, which is a presentation on our historic overlay zoning district. Britton.
Thank you so much, Chair. Britton again, everybody. So we wanted to take the opportunity as we considered a zoning to kind of transition into another type of zoning that the commissioners can expect to see, but that we don't see very often. So if y'all will remember, if you can remember back this far, back late last fall, we did kind of a brief training on the historic landmark zoning designation. And then we were having the opportunity to bring that first rezoning case for that historic landmark designation to you this evening. Another type of zoning that we have is to create historic overlay districts, or to adjust the boundaries and kind of include additional properties within a historic overlay district designation. So while we were already on the topic of zoning, staff thought that it might be useful just to cover what the criteria and requirements are for the historic overlay district designation. So the difference between a landmark and an overlay district is that landmarks are very specific, usually to a single property. And so for Mr. Johnson's property, as an example, that gave us the opportunity to treat with the same standards or a little bit heightened standards a property that is outside of the historic district. So there is not a great opportunity for us to designate an entire historic district along Westinghouse, because sufficient number of historic structures and a number of properties don't exist in that area. And so the landmark was probably the best application to protect that particular structure. We were also not trying to apply the historic district zoning to the entire property, because it was agricultural property. It doesn't have those structures. In the center of town, though, or at least kind of in old central Georgetown, we have the downtown historic overlay district and the old town historic overlay district. We do have the opportunity to have other historic districts, although that's not been brought up. But sometimes we do have requests that might change the boundaries of our existing district. So we just wanted to have a little bit of time to cover that tonight. So what we're going to talk about is the process to designate that historic overlay district, what the criteria are for that designation. You saw the criteria tonight for the landmarking. We're very different from what y'all often see for a certificate of appropriateness. And so the different types of zoning designations have different types of approval criteria, and we want to make sure y'all are familiar with those. Spoiler alert, they're very similar to what y'all just saw for the landmark. But we wanted to share also the review requirements for changes to properties that are included in a historic overlay district. Also felt that that was just a good thing to recap. And then the standards specific to our existing historic overlays, which are the downtown and the old town, they are a little bit different. And you'll see that a lot in the application process, but we just wanted to kind of circle back and cover what those were. So for a property owner who wants to either designate a historic overlay district, or in some cases, it would be apply the existing overlay district to their property. Let's say that they were just one step outside of the existing downtown overlay or old town overlay. What would they do in order to kind of be brought into that district? So they would apply for a zoning map amendment. It would have to be submitted and then deemed complete, meaning all of the required paperwork would have to be there. Staff then reviews the application, prepares a report and presentation. All of the paperwork that y'all see from me all of the time, we do specific to a rezoning. So you saw the staff report and the presentation were set up differently than they are for certificates of appropriateness. This type of application you would see look much more like the historic landmark zoning application material. So the staff report looks very different, has different kind of information in it, and then the staff presentation as well has different information than what y'all often see. The application would then be presented to y'all, to Harc, for a public hearing and a recommendation. So Harc is not the final decision-making body for zoning, that's our city council. Most zonings go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation to council. They're not the final approval body either, but it's historic overlay districts specifically only go to Harc. They don't, so if somebody just wanted to do the zoning overlay, that would come to y'all. And that's kind of written in our Unified Development Code that that's the path. There is a situation in which it would potentially go to both Harc and the Planning and Zoning Commission before going to council for a decision. So our mixed use downtown zoning district also has a requirement to be in the downtown overlay. So any property that is not currently in the downtown overlay district that someone might wish to request the mixed use downtown zoning, which only exists in our downtown, they have to be brought into the downtown overlay district as well. Meaning if you're going to have that zoning category, you also have to have the historic district review requirements applied to the property. That means you would have to go through the certificate of appropriateness process. And so after all of that is completed and the recommendations have been voted on, the application is presented to City Council for a public hearing and decision. That's actually a two-step process. And so the application goes to council in a first meeting for a public hearing and first reading of the ordinance. Zonings come with a whole document that is the ordinance that changes the zoning, has a legal description, it has a lot of legal language in it and some specifics. Harc's recommendation and vote is recorded in that document, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation. And so kind of just some very technical language goes into that. But according to our charter, which is fairly standard practice for cities, you have to read the ordinance twice before you can adopt it. And so this is a first reading that happens with the public hearing. The City Council at a later meeting will then hold a second reading of the ordinance and then make a decision. And that decision is kind of final. So whether that's approval or denial. So the criteria to designate a historic overlay district is very similar to what y'all saw tonight. City Council is to make a finding that one or more of the criteria are met. So you don't have to meet all 5. You only have to meet 1. And so that's character, interest, or value of the structure, sites, or area because of the unique role that they play. Occurrence of a notable historical event. So for example,
Can you stop for just a minute?
I'm going to excuse myself, Madam Chairman. And leave
Okay.
the meeting.
Yeah, if you'll, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Britton.
No worries. So if we had, I mentioned signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Williamson County as such. So that was kind of signed under an oak tree, not a building, but if it had been signed in a building and we still had that building today, we might look at that saying, yes, that kind of checks the box. If we can identify the structure, sites, or areas with a person or persons of kind of who are notable locally, state, or nationally, then we might say, hey, we want to be able to preserve the structure, bring it into the historic district protections because of its association. And then also you can look at the building itself and say, is this an example of an architectural style or materials or characteristics? You know, we had Charles Belford who built a lot of homes in Georgetown. So is its association with Charles Belford enough to bring it into a historic district for protections? And so that's essentially kind of what we're looking at is there a person or event or something about the structure itself, the style or materials? Is there something that we know from a local, state, or national level that's important? And then the one that we're probably going to use the least is if there's archaeological value. So this is something that we may not see very often, if ever, but the reason that this is here is because we do know from a lot of experience, and the Texas Historical Commission has an entire branch dedicated to archaeological work, that sometimes these older sites can yield some very valuable information out of the ground. And so there might be, unfortunately, it's usually not buried treasure, but there might be some kind of key information that we could potentially learn. And so there might be a reason to designate a site or a building or a structure given its potential to serve archaeological value. So even though we might not see that very often, if at all, it still is very important to an opportunity that we have to engage with historic preservation of these important sites. And so once the property is brought into a historic district, the certificate of appropriateness requirement applies. And so that's the application that y'all are very accustomed to seeing. And so we have our design guidelines for the downtown and Old Town overlay districts. Those design guidelines would actually apply here. And so I mentioned that Mr. Johnson's property as a historic landmark would have the certificate of appropriateness application requirement applied to his property. We would still use the design guidelines that we have now for his property, although he would have the opportunity, they didn't choose to request it, but they would have had the opportunity to request a special set of design guidelines just for that property. Instead of creating a special set, we would use the set that we have now. And that's kind of the standard unless there's kind of an alternative requested or kind of an alternative set of guidelines that would be adopted for the creation of a new district. So basically take what we have for the existing historic districts and continue to apply those. The downtown and Old Town overlay districts have a little bit different zoning criteria, but something I want to share because it's important is that the designation of a historic district, even to bring a property into our existing historic districts, the approval criteria focuses on the history and the historic value of the property. It does not focus on and does not provide criteria for the zoning standards. And so we don't have, when staff goes through those 5 criteria and evaluates, does this comply or not comply with the requirements? We are not looking at the application of zoning standards in terms of building height or setbacks or parking requirements. We're only looking at, does it meet these criteria for historic value? And so where the downtown overlay district has additional standards in, it protects historic properties, but in addition to that, building height is limited to 40 feet. Our setbacks are generally 0, kind of a build to line. One of the reasons for that, because the downtown is a primarily commercial district and we want buildings to come right up to the sidewalk. Think about how they are on the square. It creates this kind of urban environment where if you do have parking, it's in the back or the parking is less prominent. We also do not require properties to provide parking in area 1 of the downtown. That's in the 9 blocks surrounding the courthouse square. So if you have a property there, your business does not have to have any parking. There's no room for it. And so we don't have that requirement. In area 2, which is everywhere else in the downtown overlay district, we have a lower parking ratio for those properties. So you're not expected to put as many cars for a business as you are as in other places in town, for example. And then any kind of signage that you put, and this is for downtown and Old Town both, any signage requires this approval of a certificate of appropriateness if you're in the downtown and also in the Old Town overlay. So the Old Town overlay district is primarily residential and it has a little bit different standards. So the building height here, for example, instead of 40 feet is 30 feet. So that's one of the important distinctions from a zoning standpoint. Parking is actually very similar to what it is in the rest of the city, but there is an option for an alternative parking plan if parking challenges need to be worked out around a historic property in particular. Signage, like I said, is something that requires a certificate of appropriateness. One thing that is very particular to the Old Town overlay district is that the maximum building height at the setback is limited to 15 feet. So setbacks are 20 feet from the front property line, 15 feet from the side street property line, 10 feet from the rear, and 6 feet from the side for a residential single family zone property. That means that you cannot have a 2-story building height at that line kind of by right. You have to only have 15 feet, which would be difficult to get a 2-story height structure there. this is where the commissioners have the opportunity to approve a modification to that, but the standard is that the buildings are a little bit lower in height along the setback lines. And so it's pretty consistent with the way that historic structures are constructed for the most part. And so part of the reason that Old Town has a little bit different requirement there than honestly any of our other zoning districts is because it's kind of an acknowledgement of the character and development patterns that we see in our Old Town and kind of moving toward staying consistent with those. And so setbacks are according to the underlying zoning district. We have residential zoning, we have some commercial zoning in Old Town. So we actually look at the base zoning for that. Setbacks don't have any kind of particular difference in the Old Town overlay. But then what we do have a limit for, and which y'all don't see very often, but it does, it can come up, is that the floor to area ratio, the ratio of the building area compared to the lot area is limited to 45% or 0.45, meaning if you have a lot that is 10,000 square feet, the building area cannot be more than 4,500 square feet unless Harc approves an exception to that, essentially. And so that is one of the things that y'all have the opportunity to modify as part of the certificate of appropriateness application process. So to recap all of that, historic overlay districts, even the downtown and Old Town that we currently have, are recommended by Harc and decided by the City Council. The request must be found to comply with only one of the 5 approval criteria, although it can be more. Properties within the historic overlay districts are subject to COA application requirement. So wherever that historic overlay district is, or whatever property might be included in that district, they would have to go through the COA process that y'all see mostly, and then the design guidelines are going to apply to all of those properties. And so that's whether it's residential or commercial development. The downtown and Old Town historic overlay districts each have additional zoning standards. And so for downtown, it's building height, setbacks, parking, and signs. And for Old Town, it's all of those things plus an additional standard for floor to area ratio. And so commissioners, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have and really appreciate everyone hanging in for this training. We just wanted to make sure that the commissioners have this information, we're aware of this information, and give you the opportunity to ask any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Britton. Any questions for Britton regarding zoning in the overlay districts? I do believe that we have one of these coming up. Is that correct, Britton?
Yeah, so it's quite a month for Harc. Y'all will be seeing a rezoning request in the next meeting. So we just sent out notifications for that yesterday. And so y'all will see a property that the request is to rezone to the mixed use downtown district. And so with that comes a requirement to be included in the downtown overlay district. So the commissioners will be reviewing the application as it relates to the downtown overlay portion of the request.
Okay, thank you. So this will be a good time that if you all have questions, or I'm assuming, Britton, if people want to digest this and then get back with you on questions prior to our next meeting, can do that as well.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be available. Excuse me, happy to be available.
Any questions from anyone tonight? Okay. All right. Thank you, Britton. Appreciate that. Okay. So our last agenda item for this evening is item H, which is updates from our city staff. Nat, Britton, Sophia.
One second, I apologize.
All right.
There you are, Nat. Hey, Sophia.
I thought that maybe Britton wanted to make an introduction here.
I do. So let me, but I don't see him in the meeting yet. We wanted to make a fun announcement to y'all. So I won't hold things up, but we have had the opportunity, and I'm very, very excited that we have brought our very first historic preservation intern on board with the planning department. And so his name is Shane Warren. He's a senior urban planning student at the University of North Texas. And so after going through a hiring process, we were really impressed with his qualifications and really excited that his experience really well matched some of our needs. So y'all are hopefully remember, and we really appreciate, you've given us some feedback on the certificate of appropriateness process and on the staff reports and the quality of those reports. Are we providing the information that y'all need to make decisions? And so we're continuing to improve that process. And so part of Shane's role with us in the planning department is to help improve the document templates that we use to provide staff reports and presentations to the commissioners. And so the more we're able to make those consistent and to make sure that we're capturing as much information as we can to provide good information for y'all's decision making, the better. So we are working through a series of improvements, and so you can expect here in the next couple of months, your staff reports might look a little bit different based on those improvements that we're making. And the presentations will probably be fairly similar, but we're also looking at making some improvements there. And a lot of that has to do with making sure we're very clearly communicating information. So for example, I think this is a good one. You saw a little bit different notification slide than you normally do. We normally just have 3 bullet points, 2 or 3 bullet points, like, oh, we sent out this many letters, this many signs were posted, here's how many comments we got. But with the landmark application, you saw a different slide. You saw the notification area and you saw kind of a more complete count of the notification that was provided. And so we're looking at moving to a slide that looks much more like the one that you saw in the presentation tonight, because we think it provides more information and we think it provides a better level of detail. And so as we're working through that process, we're expecting some good improvements, and then we'll be looking forward to y'all's feedback once we're ready to launch and implement those. And so Shane normally works on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And so we do hope at some point in the future he'll be able to pop in and introduce himself to the commissioners and share a little bit of the work that he's doing with y'all. So really, really, really fun, exciting time for me, and really thrilled to have him and his very good skill set on board. He has a lot of, his direct experience is working for the Portal to Texas History, which is our archive resource that I make great use of. And so it's been really wonderful also to have his archival experience brought to our kind of file organization and helping with organizing our historic resources and the way that we research to provide great information to y'all. So thank you for that, and looking forward to sharing more as we move through the next few months.
Okay, thank you, Britton. That's exciting. Working at a university, we love interns. It's a great thing, great utilization of students. So that's exciting. Nat or Sophia, anything you'd like to add this evening?
None for me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. So just one update from me. I will not be at our next meeting. So Catherine, as vice chair, will be leading our meeting on the 25th. We will welcome a new commissioner to the commission, which is exciting to have new blood on the commission. And so I will see you all in a few weeks. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. This is Terry.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hyde. Do I have a second?
Second, this is Carol Lee.
Okay, thank you, Carol Lee. So motion to adjourn. Let's take a vote. Commissioner Parr, approve. Commissioner Nunn,
Approve.
Commissioner Hyde,
Approve.
and Commissioner Curry.
Approve.
All right, y'all have a good evening, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Okay,
Thank you.
goodbye.